Welcome back. Super excited. In this lesson, I'm going to run through another complete machine learning model from scratch to finish. In other words, we are going to evaluate a data set. We are going to prepare our data set. Then, of course, we're going to use the Amazon machine learning to go ahead and create our training data source, create our model itself, and then predict. So before I begin, let's take a look at our existing data set. Again, I will provide you this data set. You can download it and then use it for your practice as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Excel. Here's my data set. This is the graduate records, right? So this is the student records, so to speak, where I have serial numbers. I have a column called GRE score that this particular student scored. I also have the TOEFL score, which is I believe is test of English as a foreign language. Then I have the university rating, the SOP, LOR, CGPA, research, and the chance of admit. So these are the columns from A through I that were available in the dataset. The column J is our predictor, right? So that's our Y column where we have zeros and ones. 0 means no, 1 means yes. So a question could be asked from this dataset: what are the chances of the students that would be admitted, okay, into the university? And so on. So you can ask other questions based on your data as well. This is a relatively small data set. Typically, you would have large data set. So this would mean that number of rows that I have, for instance, if I do Control End, about 501 rows, okay, records. And let's do Control Home, take us to the first record. So I'm going to use this data set and use Amazon machine learning to predict from this data set. Let's jump right in. I'm going to navigate to my console. From my console, let's go ahead and first create a S3 bucket because we need to upload our data set into the S3 bucket. Let's navigate to S3. In order to create the S3 bucket, I'm just going to create it and give it a name. So click on Create Bucket. I'm going to call this Graduate. Click Next. If this already exists, then just say Graduate 1, for instance. Click Next. And then I'm just going to maintain the default settings and continue to create the bucket. Perfect. So once the bucket is created, let's navigate to this Graduate 1 and upload our data set. So let's click on Upload, click on Add Files, brings up the dialog box or the Windows Explorer. I'm going to navigate to my Graduate Admissions folder, and I'm going to select the Admission Predict version 1.2 final.csv because that's the one that we actually prepared for machine learning. Click Open, and this is going to go ahead and upload as soon as I click Upload the actual data set to the S3 bucket. Great. Once I have this, let's navigate to Services, and under the section called Machine Learning, this is where all the machine learning happens. Let's navigate and click on Machine Learning. This will take us to the machine learning dashboard or the console page. I'm going to go ahead and click on Get Started. And let's choose the standard setup. So by creating the first ML model, if you don't have your data ready, you can use the sample data set. If you already have the data set, then you can skip straight to the Amazon machine learning dashboard. So let's go ahead and click on Launch so I can walk you step by step, and later you can practice. So where's my data? The first step is, of course, S3. So scroll down. Notice I could use the banking.csv, which I'm also going to demonstrate, by the way, so that you get a fair idea of working with multiple data sets. So where's the S3? Our data resides. Of course, it's an S3. I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this, or the location of the S3 is the path that I wish to enter, whether it's for a single file or a folder in Amazon S3. So first the bucket name, which was Graduate, and then here's the Admission Predict version 2 final CSV file. So it automatically pulls the actual file from the bucket. So all I need to do is simply select. I can also provide a data source name. So let's go ahead and call this one data source. And before we can move forward, AWS would like to verify whether our data set is available in the S3 location or not. So I'm going to go ahead and click on verify. And it just needs some permissions from you. So do you want to grant permission? I'm going to go ahead and click on yes. And once the data is verified, perfect. So the validation is successful. To go to the next step, choose continue. So let's go ahead, click on this. And now the next step is the schema. So the schema is basically the metadata from our data ourselves. And the option that I have here that I can choose is, does the first line in our CSV contain the column names? Yes or no. So since we have column headers, at this point, the default option is no, which means that this column, the name column, notice it says var 01, variable 02, variable 03, and so on, right? Because if you do not specify or choose this option to be yes, then it's going to pick the default, it's going to place the default names. But if you choose yes, which I'm going to do right now, and notice at this point you'll see the names being populated from your Excel column headings. So if I quickly navigate to my Excel file, CSV file, notice these are the column headings that you see actually being displayed, pulled up by Amazon Machine Learning. Great. Minimize this. Perfect. So once I'm satisfied with my schema, let's go ahead and click continue. And because I've picked the combined create ML model and data source wizard, I must pick a target. And the target is the target attribute that I'm looking for, right? I'm going to use, because machine learning works by finding patterns that connect the data to the value to be predicted. So I'm going to scroll down, and here's my Y, right? That's the column that I created. And this is a data type called binary, because I'm going to do binary classification. Click continue. The row identifier is optional. I'm going to go ahead and click on review. And it gives me the final page, which is step 5, the review page. If I need to change anything, I could do so. So let's go ahead. What you need to do next is click on continue. And this is going to go ahead and give me a message saying we can't connect to the service. Try again later. So let's go ahead and refresh our browser. No worries, it happens. Perfect. So once the page is refreshed, I can now use the automatically suggested ML model settings, which is binary. ML model target is Y column. Here's the name and a couple of options that I have. The default recommended is it's going to generate a full default scope or the recipe. Use default training parameters. AWS ML is also going to set aside 30% of the training data to evaluate the training. What this means is the data set of about 500 records, right, is going to be split between 30% and 70%. So it's going to take 30% of the data and use the data as a training source, and then eventually use the data to predict based on our questions, like which student will enroll in the university or which student will graduate and so on. I could also choose the custom option here, need be, but I'm going to leave it as default recommended, review. And once again, it asks me to review and I can make the changes as required. My input data is completed. ML model is going to take and split our training data source into 70% for training and reserve the remaining 30% for evaluation, right? Great. The recipe helps Amazon machine learning find patterns in our data. So if we did not provide a recipe, it will generate one for us. And here's some advanced settings such as the maximum model size, 100 megabytes. I could also specify tags as well, if any. So once I'm done, let's go ahead and do the magic. Click on create our machine learning model. Perfect. So notice it successfully created the model. However, the status is pending. So it takes a little while before it actually creates the model for us. So I'm going to give it a few seconds, or sometimes it takes a minute or so, right, before the status changes to being successful or completed. So while the status is pending, if I scroll down, I could take a look at the input schema, for instance. This is basically the JSON output, okay? So if I click on this, it's going to open up a next tab and display the actual JSON output. which gives me the version number, row ID, target attribute. Again, this is important, right? That's the one that we're actually using. The data format is CSV file. And then, of course, the rest of the strings I also have available. I can use this JSON file, and I can use PyCharm or other Python, for example. I can use that to pull or use the JSON format as well. Great. Let's now get back to our page. Let's reload the page and see if the status has been completed or not at this point. So it's still pending. Let's scroll down. The evaluations created, the latest evaluation result. This is the result that it is going to predict and give us a percentage, right? So it's going to give us like maybe 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 0.9, 0.5, or something like that, right? So this is where our model is going to predict based on the AU score. And I'm going to talk about the area under curve, what that is. And then predictions, I can use CloudWatch metrics. Score threshold is by default 0.5. And I can generate batch predictions or real time. Notice this is grayed out because we're still waiting for the actual status from pending to completed. All right, so this is good because while the status is pending, I want to talk about the evaluation, right? So this part is going to change as soon as the status is completed. But I'm going to talk about the AUC at this point. Let me go ahead and bring up my handy slide here. So what is this AUC performance metric? I will explain that later in subsequent lesson, but just briefly here, this is the area under the curve, also known as the ROC with the AUC, right? Receiver operating characteristics. Curve is a performance measurement for classification problems, such as this binary classification, at various threshold settings. It is also written as OROC or AUROC. ROC is the probability curve, and AUC represents the degree or measure of separability. Okay, basically it tells how much model is capable of distinguishing between classes. In other words, whether the student is going to graduate or not. Okay, that's one of the criteria. Another example would be the higher the AUC, better the model is at distinguishing between patients with disease and no disease, right? So again, binary, yes or no. So this metric will be provided to us as soon as our model is. Minimize this. And let's navigate to ML models and see the status is still pending. So let's go ahead and refresh and see what happens. Okay, so we'll just give it another minute or so. Perfect. So it looks like the status shows that our ML model graduate 1 data source has now been completed. Let's go ahead and open this up and see what happens, and we can navigate to the evaluations area that I'm going to demonstrate. Great. So the summary shows that it's been completed. The data source training, we already viewed the input schema. And here, you'll notice that the evaluation says not available at this point in time. And then our status or score threshold is 0.5. Let's scroll up. Let's go to evaluations and then click on summary. And the status says it's still in progress. And that's why we're not able to yet see the area under the curve score. Perfect. So the status is now being completed, but in our instance, the recent evaluation gave us a AUC score of 0.428, which is lower than the baseline, which means the model's quality score is considered worse than random coin flip for most machine learning applications. Okay, so this gives you an excellent idea of your data, right? The most important thing is your data itself, the number of rows, because we only worked with 500 records, which is really minimal. So if you had a higher number of records, you would have a better score. This is actually a good example of when machine learning is successful and when it's not, right? So 0.42 is really a low score. It's lower than the baseline. It's not going to give you the prediction that you're looking for. If I need to, let's say, continue with, or before I actually do real-time prediction, if I can click on adjust score threshold, it brings up the actual chart for me and shows me the details of the actual trade-off based on score threshold of 5. And I can click on and drag the actual trade-off in metrics, right? From left to right, being 1 as predicted most likely to be true and predicted most likely to be false. 0 is false and 1 is true, right? So 1 is yes, 0 is no. So I can drag, and then it's going to show me that 22% of the records are as ones, which means yes, and 78% are as no's. Similarly, I can navigate to the left or to the right. Okay. So if I'm trying to predict, let's say, the top 9% or 6% or whatever, let's say the top 5% of the students' graduate records predicted to be as ones, I could leave it as at this point and then click on save score threshold at 0.93. So once the threshold is saved successfully, and it shows me up here, next I can try the real-time prediction. So if I click on real-time, this is going to give me an option where I can paste a record from my data. So to generate a real-time prediction for free using the web browser on this page, to request a real-time prediction, I can either complete the following form, which is right here, or provide a single data record in CSV format. So I'm going to go ahead, since I already have the data, so I'm going to predict for one record only, for one student. So let's bring up my Excel file here. So let's go ahead and pick any one of these students. Let's say, how about this student right here? So I'm going to copy this row, navigate back to my console, click on paste a record, and then paste here. Notice if I just cut and paste or copy and paste from Excel and paste it in this field, it gives me a lot of blank spaces, right? So to complete the field successfully, I need to place a comma and remove the empty spaces. Okay. So let's go ahead and make sure it's in the correct format. Perfect. So now if I click submit, it's going to go ahead and give me the prediction result on the right side. So of course I need to click the create prediction right before it actually shows me the result. Perfect. So let's go ahead and click on create prediction, and there we go. So the result here shows the predicted labels to be true, which is 1. So here the target name is Y, which is the Y column that I predicted. Label is 1. That means this particular student is likely to, let's say, graduate or go to the university or whatever the question was. So perfect. So I just wanted to run through the entire process from the data source to actually adjusting your model and training your data source, and then of course trying the real time. So if you have any questions, post in the discussion area. With this, let's move on to the next lesson where I'm going to use another data set, and that data set is going to be provided by AWS so that you can actually see a little bit of machine learning with large data sets where we have over 40,000 records. Awesome. So practice with this. Hope this helps. Let's move to the next lesson.